The claim I'll be refuting today is that genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, are safe to consume. My opponent gives three supporting claims. One, he defines GMOs and compares it to natural foods. Number two, he explains how the GMO process is similar to the process of selective breeding. And number three, he gives us the health assessment of GMOs. For his first supporting claim, he clearly defines what GMOs are and tries to build a correlation between natural foods and GMOs. He even cites a testimony from Dr. Neil Tyson, who said practically every food you buy in a store for consumption by humans is genetically modified food. However, this evidence is insufficient to show a relationship between GMOs and natural foods actually exists. All this quote does is provide background information about GMOs, which makes it not smart to make an inferential leap. Also, this piece of evidence holds no relevance and does not advance the main proposition because it's taken completely out of context. The main point that Dr. Tyson was trying to convey to the audience was not the safety of GMO consumption, but rather the advantages that GMOs have when compared to their wild counterpart. In fact, Dr. Tyson never once says anything about genetically modified food safety during the course of his interview. An example from the interview that Dr. Tyson says is that he compares wild apples to genetically modified apples to show that genetically modified apples were simply just made sweeter. And he also uses a comparative example of wild silkworms and genetically modified silkworms to express how only genetically modified silkworms are able to survive in the wild and therefore produce our silk. Simply put, this whole interview from Dr. Tyson had nothing to do with the safety of GMO consumption as my opponent claimed it did. This whole supporting claim consists of nothing but expository information that would have been better if my opponent used it for his introduction in his claim of fact speech. For his second supporting claim, my opponent makes a good analogy between the functional aspects of the methods between GMOs and traditional foods. He even provides us with a quote from executive in the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Laura Tarantino, who stated that the method of genetic engineering does not substantially differentiate them from the method of non-engineered foods. However, the problem with this is that it's not the method that is important, but rather the effect that is caused by the method. One effect of GMO process is the injection of the bacteria Bacillus thuringiensis, or Bt toxin, which is an insecticide found in genetically modified plants. And according to the executive director of Institute for Responsible Technology, Jeffrey Smith, the Bt toxin produced by genetically modified corn kills insects by punching holes in their digestive tracts. And a 2012 study confirmed that it indeed does puncture holes in human cells as well. My opponent focused on the cause of the GMO process and failed to recognize the effect that occurs from it. And for his third supporting claim, he presents a toxicity report from the 2003 position paper written by Society of Toxicity in a vague manner without fully explaining the process or details of the experiment that was conducted. My opponent failed to show the authenticity and expertise of this toxicity report because he gathered this piece of evidence from an outside source called Reason.com instead of going directly to the position paper itself. The website he quoted basically found that the safety of GMO foods appears to be equivalent to that of traditional foods, but he provides no statistical evidence. And when I tracked down and read the 2003 position paper in its entirety, I found that the safety of the genetically modified foods in this experiment was only tested on using established and accepted methods of analytical, nutritional, and toxicological research. The position paper only tests three aspects of GMOs and fails to account for another variable that should be tested when determining the safety of these organisms. Judy Carmen, PhD from the Institute of Health and Environmental Research, stated, "We need long-term safety tests that are relevant to human health done by people independent of genetically modified vested interests." What this shows is that there's a problem within the research itself because it does not cover all the potential safety hazard tests. Long-term safety is an aspect that is not tested within this experiment, which shows that this research is insufficient to reach the conclusion that it did. Every aspect of GMOs have to be tested in order to have a better understanding on its consumption safety. In conclusion, I believe that my opponent's claim of fact speech clearly explains the ongoing controversy behind genetically modified organisms, but fails to provide any statistical, sufficient, and relevant information to convince me that genetically modified organisms are safe to consume. Thank you.
All right, Terry, most of your argument goes to challenging the grounds and the warrant of the advocate. So you are in essence saying that the evidence that the advocate presents is insufficient to make the inferences that they were claiming. On the first point, for instance, you talk about Dr. what's his name? Degat? Tyson. Dr. Tyson being quoted out of context, mostly referring to the benefits of genetic modified food as opposed to the safety issues, and that's a pretty reasonable press. If you had, for instance, a segment of the material that comes directly after the quote that the advocate used, that might illustrate that point a little bit better. But you use a different example, this apples idea, and illustrate that. And then apparently also talked about the silkworms in the same argument. So there's some question about, there's an argument here that seems to be discussing whether or not there's a benefit to the GMOs. But the issue of safety, as far as from your description, is that it never came up. I don't remember what the advocate's quote was. But if it's being used for safety and it doesn't apply to safety, there ought to be some direct context that we would be able to get from the quote that was cited. And so, like I said, something that's more specific to that point would be helpful. On the second point, I think you're a little hair-splitting here when you're talking about it's not the method, it's the effect of the method. I understand what you're saying here. The notion that this produces something in the genetically modified foods that could also have an effect on humans because it's designed, for instance, to fight off insects, and it could have a potential problem for us. The quote on that being found in human beings as well, I think needs to be a little bit clearer. The challenge to the evidence that the advocate presents, because they cited a more general publication as opposed to the research publication, it's an okay challenge. I don't know that it gets you very much. The other evidence suggesting that we need to have information from this subject that is independent. Well, there's not any demonstration that what we've had has been problematic, or that it was all from industry sources. And the one thing that's missing here, and I know that you don't have to make a counterclaim, but in this particular context, why do we need to research this if there's no indication that there is a problem? This would be one of those places where if there was more indication that a problem existed, then that last argument that says that we need to have independent studies would make a lot more sense. And so I think that, I know that you didn't want to make an argument about counterclaims and say that they're automatically harmful, but you did make an inference up above with the Bt toxin, and the long-term studies, there's got to be something that says that people are having problems, or that we're likely to have problems long-term. That's why we need the long-term studies. That's something I think still is necessary in that section of the argument. All right, thank you.